They beat her until her screams broke into silence. Then they tied her ankles with coarse rope and hauled her upside down into the burning sun. Blood dripped from her split lip. Dust clung to her sweat-soaked skin. Every lash of the whip left a mark meant to shame, not just a hurt. She was not hanging to die quickly. She was hung like an animal, displayed for humiliation. The wind carried her shallow breaths, ragged and uneven, like a flame about to go out. Beneath her, half buried in the dirt, a crude wooden sign lay splintered. The words scrolled in red paint were still clear. The white man never forgets. The desert was silent except for the groan of the rope as her body swayed. Her hair hung in tangled strands, brushing the dust, black as night. Her wrists were raw and swollen from the cords that bound them behind her back. Her chest rose with desperate effort, each breath a rebellion against death. The way she fought to breathe reminded him of an old war buddy who never gave up. Even when the odds were lost for hours, no one came. The men who left her wanted her to be seen, to be found. A warning to anyone who dared stand with her. A curse carved into flesh and memory. Elias Ford was not supposed to be here. He had been trailing a stray calf, following its prints through dry washes and thorn brush. The sun was cruel overhead, that the kind of heat that cracked lips and split the earth. He had counted on solitude, the kind he trusted more than people. But fate had different plans. He heard at first as a sound too faint to be real, a weak gasp carried by the wind. His horse stiffened, ears twitching, and Elias knew it was no ghost. He slid from the saddle, rifle slung across his back, boots crunching softly as he followed the sound. Through juniper and stone, he found the clearing. There she was, a girl no older than 18, dangling upside down from the old cottonwood tree. The sun burned across her bare legs and bruised arms. Her eyes were half closed, lashes thick with dust, lips cracked and bleeding. Elias froze, his gut clenched like a fist. The sign in the dirt glared at him. The words were loud without a voice. The white man never forgets. It was not just a message. It was a threat. Anyone who touched her would share her fate. He cursed under his breath. His hand went to the knife at his belt. The girl stirred just barely. Her head turned in a weak motion. Her voice was almost broken, but the words cut sharp. "Don't cut me loose. They will kill you." Her eyes fluttered open, dark with fear and fire both. Elias felt the ground tilt under him. Here was not just a girl, but a decision. If he walked away, he would live. If he cut her down, he would be marked for death. The rope creaked. A drop of blood slid from her temple to the dust below. Elias's chest rose and fell. His hand tightened on the knife hilt. The desert around them was too still, as if even the wind waited for his choice. He took a step closer than another. The knife gleamed in the sun, a thin promise of mercy. Her gaze clung to him, silent, fleeting, but also warning. He could feel the weight of every ghost behind her words. In that moment, Elias was no longer a rancher chasing cattle. He was a man standing at the edge of fate. One cut would bind him to her life. One cut would ignite the fire of vengeance against them both. His heart pounded like war drums. His breath was iron and dust. The knife rose, the rope strained, and the question struck him harder than the heat. If you were Elias Ford, staring at a girl hung his bait beneath a curse, would you walk away to save your own life, or cut her down and risk losing it? Elias cut the rope. The fibers snapped, and the girl dropped hard into his arms. Her body was light, too light, like she'd been starving for days. Her skin burned with fever. For a moment he thought she might already be gone, but then her chest rose, weak and shaky. He carried her back to his horse. Every step felt heavier than the last. The sign in the dirt glared at him like a curse. The white man never forgets. He spat into the dust and tied her gently across the saddle. By the time they reached the old way station, the sun had sunk low. The building leaned against the wind, roof patched with rusted tin, walls gray from years of storms. It was no home, but it was shelter. Elias laid her on the cot, covered her with his coat, and poured a little water into a tin cup. She tried to drink, coughed, then sipped again. Her eyes stayed on him, dark and guarded, like a wild animal that had been beaten too many times. He spoke low, his voice steady. "You're safe here, at least for now." She said nothing, only pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. The night stretched long. Elias cleaned the cuts on her wrist, wiped the blood from her face. She flinched when he touched her, but she did not pull away. He worked slow, gentle, careful, as if she might shatter in his hands. When he finished, he sat back in the chair and stared at the flickering lantern. He was a man who had spent years alone. Yet tonight, the silence felt different. It was heavier, filled with the weight of her breathing, the sound of her shifting on the cot. Every so often he caught her eyes on him, sharp and restless. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw the fight still burning in her. Hours passed. Coyotes cried in the distance. The desert air grew cold. Elias laid his rifle across his lap and waited for sleep that never came. At dawn, he woke to a sound he had not expected. The girl was sitting up, hair tangled, eyes fixed on him. Her voice was rough, but clear enough to make his heart pause. "Why did you cut me down?" The question hung in the air, sharp as a knife, and Elias knew whatever answer he gave, it would bind him to her fate. Elias did not answer right away. The girl's question cut through the silence, sharper than a blade. "Why did you cut me down?" He leaned back in his chair, hands folded over the rifle resting on his lap. The truth was tangled, but he knew he had to say something. "Because no one deserves to be left hanging like that," he muttered. His voice was rough, almost embarrassed. Her eyes narrowed, doubtful, like she was testing if he believed his own words. For a long while, she said nothing. Then she pulled the coat tighter as if she could hide from the memory of the rope. Finally, she whispered, "They wanted me to die slow, not quick, slow, so everyone could see." Elias felt the words hit him deep. He knew cruelty. He had seen it before, but hearing it from her lips made it heavier, like the weight of that broken sign in the dirt had followed them here. He asked her name. She looked away. "Naiva," she said at last, though something in her tone told him it was not the whole truth. Still, he nodded. "Naiva it is." Then the next days passed in uneasy rhythm. She ate little, spoke less, but her eyes told stories she would not yet share. Elias hunted rabbits, brought water from the well, tried to make the station feel less like a ruin. At night, he slept in the chair by the door, his rifle closed. On the third morning, footprints appeared outside in the dirt, fresh, sharp. Military issue. Elias crouched low, studying them. His jaw tightened. They were not alone anymore. He stepped back inside. Naiva sat by the window, tense as a coiled snake. "You seen anyone?" he asked. She shook her head silent, but her fingers twisted the blanket until her knuckles turned white. That evening, a rider came. Blue and gold uniform. A cavalry lieutenant. He dismounted, pulled a paper from his coat, and handed it down. A wanted notice, a sketch of a young Apache girl. The words burned. Murder. Escape. Dangerous. $50 reward. Elias stared at the paper, then handed it back without a blink. "Can't say I've seen her," he said flat. The lieutenant narrowed his eyes, studied him a moment too long, then rode off inside. Naiva stood frozen behind the curtain. She had heard every word, her eyes locked on Elias, suspicious, but also searching. Why lie for her? Why risk himself? The truth was Elias did not know either. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer a wall. It was the start of something fragile. And that is where their story begins to twist. Because secrets do not stay buried in the desert for long. If you want to keep following this wild story of survival and forbidden love, make sure you hit subscribe right now. That way you will not miss the next part when the bullets start flying and the line between love and death grows razor thin. Elias knew they could not stay at the way station any longer. Too many eyes had seen him. Too many boots had touched the dirt outside. One night, under the thin light of a half moon, he saddled the horses and helped Naiva climb up. Her body was still weak, but her spirit burned steady. They rode south toward the border, toward the promise of mountains where her people might still live free. For 2 days the desert seemed to let them pass. Heat shimmered by day. Coyotes sang by night. Naiva spoke little, but she rode close beside him. Sometimes he caught her looking at him as if weighing his soul, trying to decide if she could trust it. On the third night, the quiet broke. The crack of a rifle tore the air. Elias gasped as fire spread across his side. He toppled from the saddle, hitting the ground hard. Naiva screamed his name and dropped beside him. Another shot winded past, striking rock from the ridge. Riders appeared, rifles raised, shadows against the moonlight. Naiva grabbed Elias under the arm, dragging him toward a cluster of boulders. His boots scraped dirt, leaving a dark trail of blood behind. "Leave me," he rasped, coughing red. "Run while you can." Her hands clenched tighter around him. Her voice broke, but her words were fierce. "If you die, I die." Somehow, she got him into the shelter of the rocks. Bullets chipped stone above their heads. Naiva pressed her body against his, shielding him as best she could. Her heart pounded like thunder, but her hands were steady as she pressed cloth to his wound. The gunfire slowed. The riders circled, waiting. Elias gritted his teeth, fighting the pull of darkness. Oh, through the haze. He heard her whisper, something he had never heard before. "My true name is Elena. It means the wind that never bows." He opened his eyes, meeting hers. In that moment, he saw not just a girl he had saved, but a woman who had chosen to save him. Her lips brushed his forehead, soft and trembling. "You are mine now," she whispered. "And I will not let the desert take you." The night hung heavy, full of smoke and silence. But they both knew the fight was not over, because when dawn came, the men who wanted her dead would return, and this time they would bring more than bullets. The night stretched on, long and cruel. But somehow Elias and Aina made it through. When dawn came, the riders never charged. Maybe they feared the rocks. Maybe they feared the kind of spirit that refuses to break. By the time the sun burned high, the desert was quiet again. The two of them were still alive. Elias leaned against the stone, weak but breathing. Elena sat close, her hand never leaving his. She had carried him through fire, through blood, through the edge of death itself. And in return, he had chosen her against every warning, against every curse carved into wood and memory. Days later, they found shelter near a river south of the border. There, under the shade of mesquite trees, Elias began to heal. Elena gathered herbs, cooked what little food they had, and stitched his wounds with the patience of someone who had already seen too much loss. Slowly, strength returned to him. They built a small cabin of logs and hide. Nothing fancy, but it stood against the wind. Elias worked the horses. Elena sewed a tiny shirt for the child growing inside her belly. The sound of her humming filled the cabin, soft and steady. A song of survival. For the first time in years, Elias felt something like peace. And I, once a hunted girl, felt something like home. Their story was not written in books, not carved into stone. It lived in the dust, in the scars, in the way they held on to each other when the world tried to tear them apart. That is the lesson of this tale. Love is not about promises spoken in churches or written on paper. It is about the choice you make when the fire is hottest. It is about cutting someone down when the world wants them to hang. It is about refusing to walk away even when it costs you everything. So, let me ask you, if you had been Elias, standing under that tree, knife in hand, would you have walked away to save yourself or cut her loose and risk your life? Do you believe love can rise from the ashes of hate? Or do you think some wounds never heal? Stories like this remind us that even in the harshest deserts, there's always a chance for water, for hope, for love. And if this story moved you, if it gave you something to think about, do me a favor. Tap that like button and subscribe right now. That way you will not miss the next story from these wild western lands where bullets may miss but hearts rarely do. Because somewhere out there under the same sky, another tale is waiting. And maybe, just maybe, it is one you need to.